Hi everyone, welcome to Value. So today we're looking at the S&P 500 and how it performed under the last 16 presidents. So you might be just interested in the last few presidents. So I haven't actually dotted all the data all at once because I want to just go through it slowly, and in a way you kind of get more information with it coming in slowly in the graph rather than all these presidents coming in overwhelmingly and then it not making that much sense. So if we look at this, we can see under Biden, we had a really good start for the first about 11 months under Biden. And then basically we've just seen a massive decline under him. And anyone that held stocks in the S&P 500 when Biden first came in, and then just held it till now, they're probably at around about a negative. And if we compare this red line here, this red line is Trump. And basically under Trump, the stock market did actually very well, since basically for some obvious reasons where he cut company taxes, and then also by the stimulus that came out throughout COVID. So, there's quite a few reasons why he did really well, and a lot of people will remember it that way. So hence why we've got a really good performance on Trump, and in very mediocre performance on Biden, though we're not quite at the end. So we don't actually need to decide whether he's been successful or not yet. We can always look at how he performed later on, of course. So if we add in other presidents, so like Barack Obama, he's still very fresh in our minds, even though we've got Joe Biden at the moment. We've had a term of Donald Trump, and basically Biden served 2 terms, which basically means his line in this graph is a bit longer. So when you actually consider this, under Obama, basically his performance was actually much better than Trump's, though it just depends how you look at it, of course. But under the S&P 500, by the end of Trump's term, he did 63%. Under the end of Obama's term, he did 81%. And then basically he just continued to compound that. So over an 8-year term, Biden did really good for the markets. He kept everything really balanced, and markets kind of thrived. It was kind of like a really good booming period. So he was also the right president in a really good time as well, where he kind of oversaw things like. So at the start, Biden kind of dipped, so he got a negative 11%, but that was basically just after things had just gone to pieces, and then he'd come in, he'd help pick everything up, and then basically oversaw a really nice golden period of economic growth. And then afterwards, Trump kind of came in to kind of continue that, and then basically things have been going pretty well. So like if we look at just Obama and Trump, those 12 years, you would have seen a really nice growth in your portfolio if you were investing in just the S&P 500. And then basically now under Biden, things were going really well for the first year, and then we can see that he's actually not performed as well for the markets. Well, in general, we can look at the whole situation. There's always certain reasons. We won't go into all the reasons because then we probably won't be going through all the presidents. There's quite a lot. And I'm sure you're more interested in how the performance was. So for some of you guys, George W. Bush is still probably quite fresh in your minds. For some of you, he might not be that fresh in your mind, and you probably weren't paying attention to all the things that were going on. But that's probably basically a time when he came in, there was not that many great things going on. As you can see, there's just been negatives when he came in, almost negative 40%, basically in 2 years. So under George Bush, it wasn't a great performance for the S&P 500. He did manage to bring it back later on in his second term, but the performance did just come off quite bad, back to the negative close to 40% by the end. So after 2 terms of George Bush, your S&P portfolio would not have done that great. Whereas if we do that comparison with Obama, he oversaw 175% increase, whereas with George Bush, negative 39.5. So out of 4 presidents, only one of them's actually done quite horribly in terms of actually getting into the negatives. Of course, Biden's in negative right now, though this is not the end of this term, and I think we need to judge each one by the end of their term as well. So if we look at Bill Clinton, actually, this was actually probably one of the best periods in terms of the stock market if you were in the index. Because he, in his 2 terms, he started off quite slowly in terms of a boom, but he, on his basically first term, things were really, really good. But on his second term, things got really, really, really good. He outperformed Obama. So Obama did 175%, Clinton did 211%, and you can see that, things were quite good as well. He did do remarkably well. And if we were to put in George Bush, so this is what I mean, like George Bush Senior, he oversaw a pretty, okay performance that kind of matches with most of the first term kind of presidents, with basically, very, very similar to like Donald Trump and Obama. It's possible that if he got a second term, that things might have continued on a very similar trajectory. Though he is the slower performing president between Trump and Obama, but he is much better. He did perform much, much better than his son George W. Bush. And then if we put in Ronald Reagan did a fairly good performance as well. By the end of his 2 terms, it was 129% gain. And basically, if we were to go on the full term, that's basically Obama kind of wins in that kind of category. But he did come in at the right time, and he did do a really, really good job in building things back up. And him and Clinton basically were the best performing ones out of their first term. And then that was followed by Trump, then George Bush Senior, then Reagan. And then if we look at how the performance was after their second term, Clinton, Obama, Reagan, and then George W. Bush, who was the worst. So then we pop in Jimmy Carter and one-term president as well. Basically the 27%, which was basically 27% second from the bottom. Everyone else did perform remarkably better, but overall, it's it's all right. After that many years, it's 4 years. 27% is not too bad, but of course, compared to like Obama and Clinton, they were not the best performing years. So there were some negatives that you can kind of see if you look like really, really closely. So that's the thing. Like, I didn't want to start you guys off with something that basically bombarded you with lines, and I've just wanted to put these lines kind of gradually to show you which were the best performing ones, and you can kind of see that it's actually our most recent kind of presidents that have been actually performing to their best, whereas history, there is I'm gonna take out all the recent ones that I've just done, so then you can get a better idea. So under Ford, it was actually a 41%. So I'll take it. To be fair, I'll actually just take out the other ones, and I'll just keep Biden, Trump, and Obama, so that you can still get a good reference. So we've got Ford here, who is the green. So that actually tells you how well he was performing. So Ford, basically in the 29th month of his term, he was doing about 41%. So he was doing in between what Obama and Trump was doing, which it's a fairly good performance, and definitely a lot better than Biden is doing right now. Richard Nixon was not that favorable in the stock market by the end of his terms. Basically, it was a negative 30%. In comparison, Obama was 142%. So yeah, like it's quite a stark contrast. But of course, you can look at that. Hey, maybe it came down to the Federal Reserve, and having more data just gave them an advantage in terms of adjusting policies that could actually have a bigger effect on the stock market. So we can look at Lyndon Johnson, and basically he did 40% over his term, which wasn't too bad. But of course, once you start comparing against Obama was one of the higher performing presidents in terms of that. Of course, we can also include Bill Clinton as well, and then you can see that, hey, Obama and Bill Clinton were probably the best two performing presidents in the S&P 500. We slip in John Kennedy here, and the line just sits in here. So like, I'm going to take out a couple of these just so you can get a better idea. So there we go. So that yellow line here, under Kennedy, it was at 18.5%. So it wasn't a terribly great kind of performance. Him compared to the last three presidents was not that great in comparison. And in Eisenhower's performance was not too bad. So you can see that overall, like most presidents actually come out quite positive in this kind of performance throughout the history of the S&P 500. So it's hence why they kind of teach you to invest in the index, because regardless of what's happening, the index kind of always grows, because they're always including in much better performing companies and kicking out the worst performing companies. So hence why the value constantly increases, and it's a great way to invest in the markets without having to do too much research, and without also having to worry about who's coming into power. As you can see, regardless of who kind of came into power, most presidents kind of performed in a positive way by the end of their term. So we look at Harry Truman. They didn't start that great, but of course at the end of basically 8 years, he did perform well. So 8 years gives you an idea of, it's a whole, but basically, as you would put it, a whole business cycle, or in a whole economic cycle. And basically, by the time 8 years has passed, most people have performed remarkably good. So I think George Bush is one of the outliers when it comes to this. So if I was to add in everyone, you can see there's very few presidents that actually end where they end in a negative. So like Richard Nixon was also one. Richard Nixon, George W. Bush. And then if we look at Franklin Roosevelt, we find he had a much longer term than the average president, and he did quite well for the markets. Though a really volatile one, as you can see up here. It was a 200% increase in his first term, and by the end of his term, it was only 153% increase. So, it was quite a stagnant performance afterwards, of course, and also very, very volatile. So that's the thing. Under his term, you would have seen an increase. So hence why, you kind of leave your money in the indexes for the longer the time, the better, because over that time, you will generally get a outperformance in terms of your kind of investment. You generally will make a profit, where like even if you look at the underperforming presidents, there hasn't been that many that kind of went into the negatives, except Nixon and George Bush. and then Herbert Hoover. So basically, 3 presidents in the last 6 out of 16 were underperforming. Or actually in the negatives. Like if we were to say underperforming, we would have to actually go, actually, what's the average? But in terms of negatives and positives, only 3 presidents by the end of their term were actually in a negative, whereas 13 was actually in a positive by the end of the term, and hence why index investing is so widely popular and also favorable among people that don't want to pick stocks or ones that aren't very good at it, and why index investing kind of is advised by, say, like Warren Buffett himself, as something that you just put your money in, you just forget it, and over the longer term you generally outperform, because that's one of those things that it just constantly gains in values, because every company that's usually included in it generally increases in value and gets larger and larger and larger. So I hope that kind of helps you, in terms of seeing who were some of the best performing presidents around. By the first term, you can see Roosevelt was followed by Obama, then Clinton, Eisenhower, Trump, and you can see, at least, 4 of them were very, very recent. And hence why, people kind of view these presidents as quite in a favorable way, because they kind of experience economic prosperity, at least in a stock market kind of sense. And if we go for like by the end of their second term, Clinton was by far the better performer, and then followed by Obama, then Eisenhower, Reagan. So when we like talk about Eisenhower and Reagan, those names are not as recent, but they did see some very, very good performances. So yeah, like you can see overall, like Trump and Obama, which was the last 2 presidents before Biden, they did extremely, extremely well for the markets, and hence why people kind of see it as in a favorable way. And now we've got Biden, which we still can't tell entirely, because he's only had, not that much time, around about 2 years really. And so, the judgment still remains. But, by looking at the outcome of most presidents, it generally comes out fairly positive. Of course, he could have a similar performance to Bush and Nixon and Hoover. So over time, we'll tell how he will perform. But yeah, hence why Clinton and Obama tend to be very stable type presidents that came in. They didn't try to disrupt it too much, and they kind of just continue to build up the economy and the stability, and hence why they were seen as good, though they weren't remembered for massive disruptions in certain ways. So yeah, and I think people also kind of look at Trump in that similar way, that even though he had a very troubled kind of presidency, where it's kind of a lot of things happened, he did do a fairly good performance in his time. Even though if we look at him and Obama, you would have seen a very good performance anyway. And under Trump, things just continued. So I think we're kind of remembering the good things from Obama, and then kind of seeing that continue to increase. That's what came under Trump. He just continued to kind of push those levers to kind of print more cash, get the stock market pumping. And then basically under Biden, basically the cash stopped being pumped into the market. Interest rates started to rise, and then all the cash started being pulled out. So it's possible by the end of Biden's term that he comes in as a negative. Though, we'll have to see how things go. It could dip down negative and then come back up positive. And then whoever takes over from Biden might see another very, very prosperous period of growth in the S&P 500. We will have to see how that goes. But yeah, thanks for joining me in this kind of this talk around who were one of the best performing presidents, and it's actually quite interesting that we've witnessed some of the best performing presidents in terms of the S&P 500, in terms of Obama, Clinton, and then Trump as well. And under basically George Bush, he was probably one of the worst performers, where in his time things did not actually result in positive by the time he ended. Like, it was mostly negative. And in his second term he managed to pull it back a little bit, but basically just finished back in a negative. So it's always interesting analyzing this and going, no matter who's really in power, majority of cases you actually come out quite alright. So, hence why you look at S&P 500 and you can actually feel kind of safe in terms of how its performance is throughout the history. No matter who's in, majority of the cases you have a good chance that it comes out alright. As you can see, usually when presidents have a longer term, they come out much stronger. George W. Bush was probably one of the outliers in that, where he had a very long term but a very bad performance. And if we compare it with Nixon and Hoover, they weren't that great performing. Hoover was by far the worst at basically negative 77%. But he was a long time ago. Same with Nixon. And it's quite possible these are just general cycles that we're just seeing. Like, they pop in every so often, with these big negative performances, to basically compensate for the past ones. So it depends how you see it, but overall, it just shows that, hey, if you're 30, 40, you're investing in the markets and you're in it for 30 years, generally you come out pretty good. But of course not always the case, and sometimes it does matter if you do time it right when things are doing really, really well, that you make sure that you don't always just sit and wait, because there can be some underperforming presidents. But there's also that rule that, hey, if you wait for that to pass and things get back alright again, then things are fine as well. I think this has been going on for quite a while, and thanks for staying along with this kind of talk. I thought it was quite an interesting thing to just kind of analyze the data and then see who kind of really performed well, and it's always quite interesting. But I think most people probably really just remember what's happened in the last 20-30 years. Of course, there are some people that remember the other presidents, and that's probably quite fair as well. And that's quite a lot of history and experiences that's been there. But overall, we can see that we've actually had a really, really good period in terms of the S&P 500. It's basically the last year or so that's really been a terrible kind of memory in our minds. We have a really, really good kind of memory of the markets just constantly performing. But all good things come to the end, and basically now we're watching things just kind of crumble a little bit. But we'll see how things go by the end of Joe Biden's term, if he actually comes out positive or negative. Post any comments or questions below. Until then, good luck investing, everyone.